the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome again to the podcast.
Welcome back.
How are you, Lindsay?
I'm feeling pretty good. What about you?
I feel good. I think we just keep coming back to the Tim Burton well for our episodes. This is our third Tim Burton movie.
What does it say about us? I think we love Tim Burton a little bit.
Or at least his early works.
It's true. And this one is extra special. This was Tim Burton's first feature-length film, and it is Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Man, the last 2 weeks I've just watched a tremendous amount of Pee-wee Herman, probably more so than I did when I was like 11 or 12.
I watched the show religiously. I was a Saturday morning cartoon kid, and this was one of the shows that I watched. Of course, not a cartoon, but I watched Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Yeah, I think this last week I did some Pee-wee's Playhouse. I did Big Top Pee-wee, and I watched the Netflix movie that they put out in 2016, Pee-wee's Big Holiday.
I got a kick out of Big Holiday.
I did too.
But Big Adventure is leaps and bounds beyond both of those. It is such a just kind of wacky, zany, all over the place adventure that hits on every single genre and is its own crazy creation.
Yeah, it really is like I think like just like this like amazing work of art.
Yeah.
You know, it just says there's so much there. And, you know, on the surface, it's certainly silly and wacky and all those things. Mm-hmm. But there's this sort of subversiveness to it. And there's this, I think, real intelligence to it, too. If it's just, you know, you may not see it right off. But I think what Paul Reubens has done with the Pee-wee character in this movie particularly is like something very special.
And it's funny, I don't think I'd revisited Big Adventure in a really long time, and let alone gone really deep into Paul Reubens and Pee-wee Herman research. But he is a very intelligent guy, and I think it takes a very special character to entertain kids on one level and adults on a whole other one, because it had been a second since I had seen this movie, and I got it in a whole other different way. It was really cool.
Well, there's a lot to talk about with this movie. We're going to try to condense things as much as we can, as we usually do, to keep our episodes at a reasonable length. But we can't talk about Pee-wee's Big Adventure without talking about Paul Reubens, the creator of Pee-wee, the actor who, you know, inundated himself with this character, lived with this character, became this character to the public. But we'll talk about his early beginnings, how he got started, how the character was created. Of course, a lot of our focus will be on Pee-wee's Big Adventure, but then we'll also talk a lot about post Pee-wee's Big Adventure, because the Pee-wee Herman story is very like extensive, and you know, he did a lot of material. I mean, he covered a lot of ground, got a lot of mileage out of one character.
Pretty amazing, yeah, and still is today. So really looking forward to talking about this. And if you're a fan of Pee-wee Herman, this should be pretty fun for you. And I found in asking people, what do you know about Pee-wee Herman? Have you heard of him before? I was really surprised, as someone who has always been a fan of him, how many people were like, yeah, did he like have a red bow tie, or what was his deal again? He did like a kid's show. Just people that didn't know too much about him. So I'm even more excited to talk about Big Adventure and talk about Pee-wee. And
hopefully spark some interest in some people who, you know, are younger, who did not come up on Pee-wee, and maybe they'll be able to experience this great movie, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. But after our Pee-wee talk, we'll get into our picks of the week. My pick of the week is connected to Pee-wee's Big Adventure via the co-writer Phil Hartman, who co-starred in a movie with Sinbad, 1995's House Guest, which is a really, really entertaining movie.
I can't wait to hear about this one. It has been since it came out on video, I would say, since I've watched House Guest.
And you went with a favorite of mine for your pick of the week.
Yes, a movie from 1992, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Maybe you're familiar with the show. Maybe you didn't know it was a movie, but it sure was. And it co-starred Paul Reubens.
And my teenage crush, Christy Swanson.
I mean, she's pretty crushable in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's pretty cool.
And as always, we'll round things out with a Murray moment. But before we get into Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Lindsay, can you just give us a little bit of lowdown on what this adventure is about?
So Pee-wee is an eccentric man who is a child at heart, and his one lone prized possession is his tricked out, awesome, one-of-a-kind bicycle. And when it gets stolen one day, Pee-wee's whole world is turned upside down. And the rest of the movie is about Pee-wee's adventure to finding and tracking down his bicycle.
And meeting all these crazy characters along the way.
So many. And not only is Pee-wee entertaining, but the characters that he comes across are just as whacked out as he is.
We'll go to our first clip from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, then we'll come back. We'll talk about it.
I cannot wait to see what clip we choose.
Morning, Pee-wee.
Look, Francis.
Today is my birthday, and my father said I can have anything I want.
Good for you and your father.
So guess what I want?
A new brain.
No, your bike. Oh, what's so funny, Pee-wee?
It's not for sale, Francis.
My father says everything's negotiable, Pee-wee.
I wouldn't sell my bike for all the money in the world. Not for $100 billion, million, trillion dollars.
Then you're crazy.
I know you are, but what am I?
You're a nerd.
I know you are, but what am I?
You're an idiot.
I know you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what am I? Infinity.
No, I'm not. You
You
are.
are.
No way. Knock it off. Cut it out. Oh, shut
Shut
up,
up.
Pee-wee.
Why don't you make me?
Why don't you make me?
Because I don't make monkeys. I just trade them.
Oh, Pee-wee, listen to reason. Oh, come on.
I'm listening to reason.
Pee-wee.
That's my name. Don't wear it out.
Remember the first time I saw your bike? You were riding past my house, and I came running out to tell you how much I liked it even way back then?
I love that story.
You'll be sorry, Pee-wee Herman.
So Pee-wee's Big Adventure came out when I was a kid, and to me, there was no such thing as Paul Reubens. I only knew Pee-wee Herman as Pee-wee Herman. Even in the movie, he's billed as Pee-wee Herman in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. But that wasn't always the case.
That is true. Yeah. Man, to be able to sell a character and just not be yourself and just be that character with such conviction, that takes some solid follow through. And Paul Reubens did it for so many years. And originally, I mean, he had always kind of had a theater bug in him ever since high school. And I think that the formation of this character, this kind of like energetic, spastic freak of nature, kind of started in high school with Paul Reubens. And then later on, early to mid 70s, he joined this LA-based theater group called the Groundlings, and a lot of famous folks came out of there, like Phil Hartman, Lorraine Newman, who both got picked up and went to SNL. It was the Groundlings was like another troupe, kind of like Second City out of Chicago, where Lorne Michaels would, cherry pick people that would later be on Saturday Night Live, and a lot of characters got workshopped, including Pee-wee Herman, and Paul Reubens had like 8 or 10 characters that were solid, but Pee-wee Herman was always the one that really, I think he said in one interview, someone asked him, what was it like the first time that you got up as Pee-wee Herman and it failed? And he thought, like, for 1 second, he just was like, I don't think it ever happened. It was him, like, was Pee-wee Paul Reubens? Was Paul Reubens Pee-wee? They were just kind of, he could fall into that character so quickly.
He said he wasn't as good of an improver as the other people, but when he did the Pee-wee character, he was able to just respond in that character, anything, and it would sometimes come off funny simply by his reaction to things, instead of trying to come up with something, some story or some situation. And
like the idea of Pee-wee is that he was a stand-up comic who could never remember a punchline and was just really bad at setting up jokes, and that was Paul Reubens too. And so this character just kind of came out of a kid he knew growing up, a little bit like a spazzy kind of person, and then who he was as a comedian. And Pee-wee was born, and I think the suit came from one of the directors, Gary Austin, out of the Groundlings. He had borrowed the suit from him, and the bow tie, the kid's bow tie, was kind of a last minute addition that someone gave him one time, and it just kind of all came together, and Pee-wee was born. I think the name Pee-wee came from a miniature harmonica. The original Pee-wee was a little bit more, there's a little bit more sexual innuendo, a little bit more adult humor, but not, we're not talking Eddie Murphy Raw type of like adult humor. It was still adult, but not totally, raunchy or anything like that.
Well, it's interesting because the, how you mentioned the original incarnation of Pee-wee was supposed to be this bad stand-up comic. Mm-hmm. And it was a character that he developed quite a while before Pee-wee's Big Adventure came out. And in those early Letterman performances, because he was doing Letterman like 80, 81, 82.
It's like 82, yeah.
Yeah, and I get that. I can see that first development of that character. He's like kind of nervous. He stutters a lot. He doesn't seem like he is confident, and you get none of that in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. He's like seems totally confident in what he's doing for the most part. In the Pee-wee movies. But those early sort of interviews that he did on Letterman or performances, I should say, I feel were like that early incarnation of Pee-wee. And it's interesting to go back, and also if you, like we were saying before, someone has strung together all those interviews, and you can see year after year how he kind of like he's kind of altered the character to what it is that you see in the feature film.
Yeah. And right before that, like 80, 81, was when the Groundlings really, they came up with this new alternative format to the show, which was showcasing the Pee-wee Herman character, and it turned into the Pee-wee Herman show. And I mean, not the Groundlings, but they had like a specific offshoot that was the Pee-wee Herman show. And that was where he developed his character even more. And then at that point, the Pee-wee Herman show was really taking off, so much to the point that it was moved to the Roxy Theater and became basically just like would sell out show after show. It was for quite a few months in a row. And I think, I don't know how true this story is, but Paul Reubens said that there were only a certain amount of tickets for, a certain amount of seats for the Roxy show. And so there would be 20 tickets sold, but he would give out a bunch of free tickets, right? So there'd be 100 free tickets out there and only a certain amount of seats available, basically overbooking the theater. So then you'd have a line outside, thus creating a hype behind this. So for weeks and weeks and weeks, there's a hype behind this Pee-wee Herman show that you had to see. And so not only was the show killing it, but it was also creating a hype around it. So that was about 81, and Paul Reubens goes to audition or he's up for the season 6 cast of Saturday Night Live, and loses out supposedly to Gilbert Gottfried, who gets that part. And so it's almost out of spite that Paul Reubens just becomes completely determined and takes the Pee-wee Herman show and just guns it. And it's like, I'm going to do this full force. I'm not going to appear as Paul Reubens out in public or like do interviews or anything other than in Pee-wee Herman, and I'm going to be this character. And then this Letterman stint starts, and he's just on Letterman countless times, and this hype just gets built around him. And it's not like it's just hype, like he's funny, and there's something quirky and weird, and no one else is doing it, and just something people hadn't seen before.
And he has said that like that was like a real him losing out to SNL was like the driving force, like you said. But
yeah,
it weird to think that if he did get on SNL that season, because that was like the season that, other than Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo, they kind of like cleared house after that season, because it was like the Forgettables. And I just wonder
Wasn't
if
the
like,
greatest.
I just wonder like where his career would have went had he, gone for that and then used up that character and then it would just forever be this like, oh, this Pee-wee skit on SNL that they tried to do a movie of.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't happen.
Yeah, who knows? Like maybe, Pee-wee would have happened on the show. No one was really caring about SNL at that point, and then, it would have been crazy if Pee-wee Herman would have never happened because he got on it.
Yeah.
It would have been nuts. So then, I mean, he's doing the Pee-wee Herman show. This is not the Pee-wee's Playhouse yet. He's doing all of these appearances, and the writing of Pee-wee's Big Adventure begins. It's quite a few months, but he's talking about it and saying that he's got a movie in the works and still doing the Pee-wee Herman show. And then basically we get to Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Yeah, and Paul Reubens was working on the Warner Brothers lot at the time, and he had already written a lot of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It was a little bit of a different movie, and he said that on the lot, everybody got around via bicycle because, you would move from one lot to the next, and finally he was just like, when am I going to get my bicycle? Everybody's got a bicycle. And so he said he showed up, and they had this sort of like vintage, awesome bike for him that was so cool, and he immediately said he went back into the office or trailer that he was working in and kind of just like pitched the old script idea, and that was the day that the idea was born. To Pee-wee has his prized possession is his bike, and he loses his bike, and the whole movie is him trying to get his bike back.
Yeah. And Paul Reubens was writing this with Phil Hartman, who was also a groundling, and of course everybody knows who Phil Hartman is or was, and Michael Varhall, I believe is how you pronounce that. So there were some other people that had always been along the way that had helped develop the Pee-wee Herman character, but those were the other two writers that helped come up with Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And I think the original idea for the story was like a retelling of Pollyanna. Pee-wee comes to town and everybody's living a sad sack life, and he makes everyone's life better. And then the bike happens, and it's just like, duh, of course. This is the story.
It's a much better move. Yeah. And I know in interviews, Paul Reubens had said that a lot of the writing partners that he's had, they always wanted to go from more of the snark movie to movie, episode to episode of Pee-wee's Playhouse. Sometimes Pee-wee's very endearing and can be very sweet, and then other times he can kind of be a little snarky. He wasn't the biggest fan of the snark all the time, but he said that his writing partners, everybody always, that got the biggest laughs. So that got more and more incorporated. And I think that comes through a little more broader in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, the snark, than it does in the other films that he's done. The character seems a little bit sweeter and a little bit more reserved, and not making fun of somebody or like sort of patronizing them.
It's funny, Pee-wee's been described as a man-child character, but I wouldn't ever say that. You and I talked about this, Justin. He's like got the spirit and the creativeness and just like unbridled like positivity in some ways as a child, but he's very much an adult and like functions as an adult, but has this forever childlike spirit.
And also too, like, has been like sheltered from the darkness of the world.
Yeah.
And like, seemingly his bike getting stolen is like the worst thing that's ever happened to him in his life.
Yeah.
Like nothing bad has ever really happened to him in his existence. Everything's been pretty fun and playful. And so I think that is part of that character of like this sort of naive, sheltered.
And I think that's one of the most brilliant things about Big Adventure is that it is a fantasy movie. There's nothing, you can't look at this movie and think, okay, now how does Pee-wee get money to have a crazy house like he does? It's silly to try to rationalize a movie like this that is just built on complete fantasy.
And then that's what I love about it, because I like, and me, like me with comedians, it's like I love a raw comedian, but at the same time the cynicism can be like too much for me. And that's why I like Pee-wee so much, is because that cynicism isn't there so much. I mean, certainly some of the characters that he encounters are cynical, but he always somehow gets them to come around his way and see like the sort of positivity in things. And as cheesy as that may sound, I think that's like a very endearing quality for a film, because especially with comedy, because I think comedy, it's like easier to go the cynics route and like kind of find like go for something dark and relatable, because that's easier for an audience to relate to versus something that's happy, unless you're going for like a romantic comedy type movie. But as a straight comedy, I think it's kind of hard to be, stay that sort of like fluffy, positive, fantastical line.
It's crazy. There's just this certain naive charm that comes along with Pee-wee Herman. While, if he does have an arch nemesis in the movie, and who's the person that originally steals his bike, who's like the bully on the block.
Yeah.
And even how, that it's very much like, when you look at it, it is, two big kids that are two big kids that are in adult bodies, that are going after each other. But even the way that Pee-wee handles that, it's a little snarky, but it's like...
But it's almost like kicking your car out of the sandbox, kind of thing.
But yes, exactly. The way he handles... And I think, I don't know how many times I can mention this to you, Justin, but the way that he handles Francis in the beginning is one of the funniest things in the movie to me.
So I think one of the big things noticing with Big Adventure versus the other two Pee-wee films is, number one, the direction, and two, the music. Granted, Danny Elfman did the music on the second film, but I think that his score in this is pretty amazing, and also like kind of like gets stuck in your head. And this was Tim Burton's feature film. Tim Burton had been working for Disney, a lot of like animated projects. He had a short called Frankenweenie that Shelley Duvall was in. Shelley Duvall was friends with Paul Reubens. Warner Brothers had already had a director that they wanted Paul Reubens to use for Pee-wee's Big Adventure. The name of the director, Paul Reubens, is never said, but he said it was someone who had a couple films under their belt. They had a successful film, but he didn't feel that they were right for the movie. He said he saw the short that was suggested to him that Tim Burton directed and immediately wanted Tim Burton to do the movie.
Which, if you've seen Frankenweenie, the first like 2 minutes, you're like, yes, this should happen.
So yeah, it was pretty much like Tim Burton said, he had never done a feature film yet, and was kind of plucked out of somewhat obscurity to direct a fairly lower budgeted studio feature for Warner Brothers. And a lot of the sort of zaniness that you see on screen, especially in the beginning of Pee-wee's house and that kind of stuff, a lot of that, you've seen in other Tim Burton movies. Tim Burton brought a lot of that sort of like focused art direction and like trying to have interesting things going on in the background, having it not just be sort of a standard road movie.
Yeah, Tim Burton added so much to this. Like, for instance, like that beginning scene, like the script would just say, a machine is making breakfast. And all of that. I mean, of course, the opening to this is bonkers. It's not just a machine's making breakfast.
And of course, a lot of the claymation that you see, like his eyeballs in the dark, and Large Marge like freaking out. A lot of that you've seen in other Burton films, in Beetlejuice especially.
Mm-hmm. And you might notice too, with some things like this movie having a smaller budget, that there were corners cut or just things that looked kind of hokey, but because of the spirit of the movie, like it works. The scene where you just see Pee-wee's eyes in the dark and it's animated and it looks silly. It doesn't look like it's actually someone's eyes. And then Pee-wee's supposed to be out in the middle of nowhere, and he just starts hearing all these animal noises, and there's a flash of light, and it's revealed to be all of these like animals from like Africa that are around him, and there's just enough like live animals to make you not notice all of the rest of them are completely stuffed and like taxidermied animals. So there's some hokey moments in the movie, but it works. It works, and it's a way to cut corners.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, me, I'm like so obsessed with like directors' first films and like their age that they were when they made them, and like we've done a lot. I've talked about a lot of movies on the podcast of like this was the director's feature debut, and I think this is one of. I know I've said it about other movies, but I do think this is one of the best feature debuts. I mean, Tim Burton was 26. And
so crazy.
And when you see how like kind of low rent some of the movie looks, but you can just see the ambition on the screen.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see the creativity on the screen, And it's, to me, it's like it's really like an art piece, like a lot of the movie, a story tying things together. But a lot of this is just really interesting and like almost like lucid and like kind of strange, but somehow he doesn't linger on it too long so that it doesn't go into like total abstract.
Yeah. And there are many moments in the movie where there are dream sequences where Pee-wee's dreaming of getting his bike back, and then something nightmarish happens where the bike's taken away from him again. And I think these moments in the movie really show that like spirited ingenuity, of Tim Burton's, like the where Pee-wee's driving with a guy who's picked him up. It's an escaped convict, and he's kind of like, in and out of lucid kind of dreaming, falling asleep at the wheel, and he's passing these road signs. And if you look kind of closely, like the road signs are being jerked out of the scene. It looks really cool.
Yeah,
but
it totally looks like they're on like a theater set studio.
Yes.
Like, it's like a...
Yeah. And even how like, that scene ends with them going over a cliff, and it's obviously, yes, it looks like it's on a soundstage, but it works. It's just very ingenious.
The main thing that sells it is that Paul Reubens is just so dedicated to the Pee-wee character. Like, he maintains that level of realism for that universe, and all the characters that he meets along the way. Everybody is game, like takes him for like face value, and it's just, no one looks at Pee-wee like he's a weirdo or that he's like a freak or anything like that. And I think that's sort of one of the things that keeps at least me as a viewer interested and keeps the movie, interesting.
If it weren't for the conviction of all of the characters in this movie, it would flop. And if Pee-wee weren't so solid, it would not have the same impact. And all of the characters that he comes across, we mentioned Large Marge, who I think is, Paul Reubens said that when he did that scene with her, that he said, man, if this movie does well, you're going to be what's remembered. And I think that that's very true. Everyone remembers Large Marge.
Yeah.
I already mentioned the escaped prisoner. Even the woman, the server that he meets and kind of like has a moment of affection. Like, she's kind of, she's eccentric by herself, and her larger than life, oddly proportioned, very tall, jealous boyfriend that chases Pee-wee, and that guy's over the top. And then the hobo that Pee-wee meets on the train directly after that is just such a caricature that all of these people create this, this rich world. And another scene that everyone loves too is the, of course, the biker scene.
Yeah.
Everyone in that is so rich and so believable, but over the top believable, so much that is the world, and you buy how over the top everything is in the movie.
Yeah, and there is something to be said. It's like people gravitate towards someone who's so comfortable with themselves. It's like you because that's something that, I think we all like want to be, is like comfortable in ourselves when we're in public and not feel like anxious about being who we are, and like be comfortable in your own skin. Most people are, are a little more reserved. They feel things out, but Pee-wee is just himself, the same as he is in his house, as he is when he goes to the grocery store, as he is if he did a business meeting or at work. I mean, he's like the same, he doesn't alter his personality or his tone or anything for anybody. And that's really hard to do. And I mean, probably most people don't do that in their own lives. But anyway, Pee-wee's Big Adventure was a modest hit. It was a good career launch for Tim Burton. It was certainly a gigantic career launch for Paul Reubens. Immediately after one of the screenings, I think Warner Brothers...
It was like the premiere, I think.
Yeah, the premiere, like Warner Brothers on the spot offered... First, they wanted to do a cartoon, and he said, no, I did this, actual Pee-wee show back in the day. Like, I'd want to do a kid's show, like
a live action.
And they just said yes immediately.
Yeah, so CBS picked that up, and Warner Brothers really didn't know what to make of the movie. I think that they had very few notes when the movie was coming out, and when it initially came out, there was a little bit of promotion, it was like limited, but then they saw how much of a reaction the movie was getting, and then it was like, okay, let's roll it out a little bit more. So it was a slow start, but then it started to pick up, and it was kind of, I think it came out to mixed reviews.
Yeah, the critics didn't really know what to make of Pee-wee. If you want to see a real grouchy Siskel and Ebert episode, check out the one they do on Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
You're just like,
Ebert
come
Ebert actually says he didn't see the movie, but Siskel's just like, oh, this guy's just annoying, and
he was like, you're making me want to watch it, actually.
Yeah. Or Ebert says that, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just I mean, I can imagine it would be a hard movie to market because you're marketing as this guy that no one knows who he is. And it's almost like it worked for a movie like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is weird because you almost like Ferris Bueller's Day Off in a lot of ways. I feel like ripped this movie off in some ways by having this like sort of like name character who has like a day, but whatever, I won't.
Whoa,
but,
how have I never thought of that? Yeah.
But, because it's all based off of like you believing this larger than life figure who like everybody's already supposed to know exists. But anyway, that's for, But
I love that theory.
That John Hughes always ripping people off. John Hughes was the Quentin Tarantino of the 80s. Well, let's go to another clip from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, then we'll come back. We'll talk about the latter half of Paul Reubens' career, a little bit of the downfall of his career, and then the resurgence of Pee-wee.
So, is my horn ready yet?
Yeah, it's ready. Should be loud enough for you now.
Well, where is it? Let's hear it.
Wait, I want to talk to you first.
You are talking to me.
No, I want your undivided attention. Look, Pee-wee, this is important. There's something I want to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if you'll do something.
What?
I want to know if you'll go someplace with me.
Like where?
The drive-in.
Look, Daddy, I like you.
I like you.
That's the thing. I like you, too.
Daddy!
There's a lot of things about me you don't know anything about, Daddy. Things you wouldn't understand. Things you couldn't understand. Things you shouldn't understand.
I don't understand.
You don't want to get mixed up with a guy like me. I'm a loner, Daddy. A rebel. So long, Dad.
So once Pee-wee's Playhouse got up and running, it was kind of a hit right away. I mean, it connected with kids. Paul Reubens and the writers were saying they were always kind of going for what would make a 6-year-old just like roll off the couch and just like bust out laughing.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen Pee-wee's Playhouse in a while, admittedly, I had not seen it since I was probably 12, and I probably watched about maybe 6 episodes when we were preparing for this episode.
But you as an adult watched 6 episodes of a children's show. That's kind of like impressive. You know what I mean? Like
I don't know that admittedly I was a little Pee-weed out.
You'd also spent like 2 weeks with
Yeah,
Pee-wee,
yeah,
so
yeah.
come on.
But Pee-wee's Playhouse, I believe like all 5 seasons are on Netflix right now, and so I kind of did like a sampling of different seasons. But the gist is, he's basically at his house, and different characters come over, and it's a lot of his very stream of conscience type humor, wackiness, certain things that happen each episode. They have a secret word, and whenever they say it, everybody, you interact with the TV and you scream. And I remember doing that as a kid, like, whoa!
I know.
It's the word, they said it, you're
yes.
like,
there's a little bit of education, but it's not a Sesame Street type of like kids education or anything like that. It is definitely supposed to make kids roll on the floor laughing, but also be interesting enough. If their parents are around, they're going to be entertained on another level.
Probably one of the wildest things about watching Pee-wee's Playhouse now was that everybody always says like, oh, we live in an age where no one has a attention span anymore, and like you only want to watch 30 seconds videos, and that's true.
Yeah.
That's totally true. But man, when you watch Pee-wee's Playhouse, it really shifts so much.
It is like that. Yeah.
It was like so far ahead of its time, because when I'm watching it now, I'm like, oh no, it keeps your attention because they don't stay on anything for too long. He'll be on one thing and all of a sudden he'll just shift to, now I need to like look at a pen pal for my friend in Japan, and he'll sit down and like go to this thing for like 2 minutes, and then someone will come over. And so it is very much like made for like a short attention span.
And there's a lot of crazy visual things. Like it'll just go completely, like the screen will go completely green for no reason, or if there is a reason, it'll just cut to something completely else that's, wacky and wild. It really is, like, watching it as an adult, I kind of felt like a little bit like I should do drugs and watch Pee-wee's Playhouse, that it would be like, it was entertaining, not on drugs.
I'm certain plenty of people have done drugs
Yes.
and watched Pee-wee's Playhouse.
But, like, I can't imagine. I bet it is like epic on some type of hallucinogenic.
I'm sure like any stoners that are listening to our podcast are like, oh, duh,
Dude,
like,
you have
I just
it?
watched it earlier this afternoon, bro.
So Pee-wee's Playhouse was a complete success with kids, and parents liked it enough. Like my mom, I asked her if she remembered watching this, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I loved it. It was like the only show that I liked watching with you as a kid." So the show was a success, which led to the second Pee-wee film, Big Top Pee-wee. And it was not so much of a hit, or at least not as much as Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So Big Top Pee-wee was just kind of, it's almost like Pee-wee had a reset, and all of a sudden he's a farmer and hated by everyone in his town, and a big storm hits and literally blows a circus into his backyard. And there's a love story. Pee-wee has a girlfriend. He's kind of where Big Adventure, he's not asexual, but he's just kind of like more eunuch-y kind of.
Yeah.
And Big Top Pee-wee, he's a little oversexed. Not oversexed, but he's just a sexual being, and we just weren't used to.
He's a little aggressive.
Yeah, he's a little aggressive. But fun fact, his makeout scene with Valeria Galino, I still think it's the longest on-screen kiss, which is over 3 minutes long. And when I was revisiting that, when that kiss was happening, was like, wow, I don't remember this being this long. It's kind of getting more comical the longer that it's, Anyway, Big Top Pee-wee, it's fine. Not the same. Not the same.
To me, I hadn't seen Big Top Pee-wee since I was a kid. I didn't like it as a kid. I remember, loving Big Adventure and not liking Big Top Pee-wee. And when I started doing some research, it was just like, man, everybody hates Big Top Pee-wee, and it was kind of like universally panned. And 20 minutes into it, I was like, this is a tough watch, because I feel like it really is in a lot of ways not just unfocused, but I feel like the tone of Pee-wee is a lot different, and the charm and sort of the snarkiness and everything it seems a lot more muted in that movie, and there's just not a lot of humor going on. It's just more just a lot of stuff, and then the last 25 minutes of the movie is just them doing like a circus performance act, which is kind of an odd choice to do, but I'm glad, I think you said this, I'm glad it exists. I'm glad that there's another Pee-wee film. I think it would have benefited. I'm shocked that Warner Brothers didn't do the Big Top. It actually switched over to Paramount, which is why Danny Elfman had to redo a score that was different. I would have loved to have had that be, in the canon, the score. Like, I don't know, for me, Big Top is a tough watch, but I will say there is a St. Louis connection.
Oh, I love this.
We do have an actual small size circus that takes place maybe like a mile from where we record our podcast here. And it moved to St. Louis because the guy who had the circus in California was hired to do all the circus stuff, put all the production stuff on Big Top Pee-wee, and the money that he made, he was from St. Louis, the money that he made from that, he moved everything he had to St. Louis and started the small circus here that has been going strong for many, many years.
Circus
Flora, yeah. I think that's kind of cool.
That's
that we have
awesome.
A tie-in. And
I had no idea about that.
Yeah, and actually, Bo Shoulders, who has made our logo, I got this story from him because his wife has worked for Circus Flora for many years.
Thanks, Bo. That's a pretty cool story. So even though Big Top wasn't the biggest success, Pee-wee's Playhouse was still going on. Big Top Pee-wee was 88, and the show ran new seasons until the fall of 1990. Around the third season of Pee-wee's Playhouse, Paul Reubens had agreed to do two more seasons with CBS. And so like right around 1990, that was coming to an end. CBS wanted him to do a sixth season, and he was burnt out basically on Pee-wee. And I mean, at this point, what he'd been doing, he was not Paul Reubens. He had been
for over a decade, really. Yeah.
He was Pee-wee Herman.
We're talking a decade of like any interview he ever did, any public appearance, like he never was not Pee-wee Herman.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy and amazing dedication, but I cannot imagine what that would do to your psyche as a person. Maybe it didn't affect him. I don't know, but I can't imagine it didn't have some effect. So he was burned out. So the show was still going on, and they were airing repeats, and it kind of gone in syndication. And Paul Reubens decided to take a break, traveled a little bit around the country and trying to figure out what was going to be his next move. After you've done this character for so long, like, who are you? What do you want to do? And he finds himself at his parents' house in Sarasota, Florida. We're talking like mid-1991 at this point. Pee-wee's Playhouse is still on television, airing repeats. And we come upon the time that basically destroyed Pee-wee Herman's career at that point. Yeah, really unfortunate incident where he was, and I think this is the incident that everyone knows about. I get really mad talking about it, but he was caught in a porno theater masturbating and arrested for it. Just take a second to think about the reporter that comes across the name Paul Reubens on that blotter when she goes into work that night, and you have a moment where you're like, as a journalist, this is a story and I can run with this. And I wonder if it really dawned on her that she was about to destroy a man's career for masturbating, something that everyone does. He did it. It was a victimless crime. No one else was involved. And
not only that, just destroy someone's career for just so you could get a story.
A story.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand. Yes, there is a story there. Paul Reubens was arrested for indecent exposure, or I don't know if it was indecent exposure, but it was public indecency, whatever. But there's just a part of me that's like, I don't know. The porno house exists. What do you think people are doing in there? And I don't know. It conjured up all of these like bad jokes and just like, I don't know. It made Pee-wee Herman into, or the media at that time. And I hate saying the term "the media" did something.
But it was like a media
but
frenzy.
It was.
Yeah, it was like so controversial that
a
children's TV show star, and a lot of the reports would just say was caught masturbating in public, as if he was like in the middle of the street in front of a bunch of kids.
Like on a playground or something.
Like they would sort of like omit the fact that he was in the porn house.
Yeah.
It ended Pee-wee Herman's career.
And I think even more like shocking than his, quote unquote crime was his mugshot. People were really shocked at his mugshot, which was the exact opposite of what people had, become used to as this children's show, host, clean cut, childlike guy. And he, he's got long hair and glasses and just looks grimy. And I don't know.
Not only that, no one had seen him out of character in over a decade. And now like this picture's like the circulating, across
big shocker. He's an actor.
Yeah.
Pee-wee Herman is not who he is. And while, he was getting a raw deal, kind of dealt to him, he did have a lot of friends coming to his side and defending him, like Cyndi Lauper, Zsa Zsa Gabor, a lot of big name celebrities were coming to his defense. And on top of people, being in the streets.
Yeah, Pee-wee fans didn't turn on him.
No. And it's kind of crazy because there was some poll that, I don't know if it was CBS or some poll that went out that was just anonymously, back when they did polls by phone, you know, the majority of people that were polled were like, yeah, I don't really see a problem with it. And it was pretty much like people didn't have a problem with it, but the way that the media blew it up was just insane. I think later that year, he went on the MTV, the VMAs, the Video Music Awards, as Pee-wee Herman and made a joke, something like, hey, has anybody heard any good jokes lately? Like, okay, poking fun at what happened.
Yeah, because all the late night talk shows that used to have him on were now like, he was like their opening monologue punchline.
Yeah, and just such a cheap shot. But it didn't kill Paul Reubens' career. He most certainly did have a 90s comeback with actually Tim Burton, but starting with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie, Batman Returns. He did The Nightmare Before Christmas, Mystery Men a little bit later. Men. Dunstan Checks In,
yeah,
Matilda.
There was a Western called Masked and Anonymous that he had a bit part in.
And then a lot later, Blow. There are a lot of people who really appreciated his role in that movie too. So it didn't kill his career by any means. And Pee-wee Herman's, the character, has certainly had a resurgence since then. And we're kind of omitting a lot of things that Paul Reubens did, like bit parts. Like he was in a fair amount of things. The man didn't disappear.
2 decades go by, and with everything, you know, we all grow fond of nostalgia, and Pee-wee's Big Adventure had gained just the enormous following that it has today. And then Netflix put out an original Pee-wee movie called Pee-wee's Big Holiday that came out in 2016. And you know, it was a fairly decent budget movie, co-written by Paul Rust, who also has his own Netflix show called Love that I really appreciate.
Oh yeah, that's right. I really liked Big Holiday. I was charmed by it. It took me. It felt like they were trying to recapture the brilliance of Big Adventure. It took me a second to get kind of back in the Pee-wee saddle, but I don't know. I found that movie to be really charming, and there were plenty of points that I laughed out loud.
Yeah, it was kind of like they were trying to follow in the same path of Big Adventure. You know, not always hitting the mark. But I thought that for, you know, trying to recreate something based off of a character that no one had seen in like 2 decades, did a pretty decent job. I did not dislike it. I'd watch it again, you know.
It is really crazy too that character can still withstand, and you make a movie, you know, that much later, and it still is really decent.
And the probably oddest thing about it is if you've recently seen The Irishman, they did a hell of a lot better job making Pee-wee Herman not look 65 in Pee-wee's Big Holiday than they did with all the digital technology that they had to make De Niro and gang look younger in The Irishman. Because you know, he looks a little different, and he is heavily make-upped.
Yeah.
But you don't. I mean, you know, he's 65 in Pee-wee's Big Holiday, and he's still supposed to be playing this sort of like childlike character.
Yeah, it is pretty ingenious too that the character of Pee-wee Herman has always had a lot of makeup on, like not like obviously makeup,
there was some digital touch up, but
sure,
you know, and it's easier, I think, by doing. I love The Irishman. I'm poking a little fun, but like it's easier to do digital touch up with someone like who's already wearing a ton of makeup, who's supposed to look kind of goofy already.
But it is really cool that it's something they probably weren't even thinking of, that having a guy that is wearing makeup and rouge and lipstick and, you know, all of these things that make him such a caricature would work to their advantage when Paul Reubens is much older. He pulls it off really well.
Which brings us to now. It's the 35th anniversary of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Paul Reubens is doing a cross-country tour. He's touring with the film. Did not make a stop in St. Louis, which is shocking to me because there's plenty of venues here that, you know, but we do get skipped over and things go straight to Chicago.
All the time.
And, you know, it wasn't without trying that we were going to get tickets, but that thing sold out. I'm talking super, super fast. Yeah. When I looked, there were only single seats up in the nosebleeds, and if we're going to drive all the way to Chicago to hear Paul Reubens talk and watch Pee-wee's Big Adventure,
not for the nosebleeds for that price.
No, we want to, you know,
But I am super happy to know that it can still pull that many people, that many people want to see him. And I mean, that says something about someone's like long-lasting career and his performance. I think Paul Reubens is such an amazing actor. Really, I think underrated.
Yeah. And if you are one of the lucky people that is getting to see this screening and hear Paul Reubens, please message us, let us know how it was, because we're super bummed. We wish we could see it, but maybe it'll be such a huge success that they'll do a second round and add more cities. Who knows?
Oh yeah, Paul Reubens, if you happen to hear this, there's plenty of venues. We'd love to have you here in St. Louis. Well,
let's stop there on our Pee-wee talk. We'll go into our picks of the week. Like I said, mine was House Guest with Phil Hartman, beloved Phil Hartman, and Sinbad. And yours was
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
The original movie.
The original movie, yes.
What can you tell me about Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
When there's a movie that takes the high school experience and adds a completely unnatural, almost anomalous aspect to the story, chances are I'm going to be a fan. Most of the time these movies have some kind of comic element, so making an unreal event believable in a familiar setting is essential, and high school in general kind of sucks, so make fun of it. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a movie designed to empower young women and put a twist on horror movies. In some ways, high school is a horror movie, but one built on humiliation, cruelty, isolation, and power, like who has it and who doesn't. No matter how much of a little gem Joss Whedon's Buffy may be, I feel like the title is going to forever evoke a snarky response. At least that's always been my experience whenever I've uttered the name Buffy. Fran Kazooie was the director of this 1992 film and also helped Whedon develop Buffy even more, and then went on to help him produce the television series of the same name. If you don't know, Buffy Summers is a Southern California Valley Girl cheerleader type, and one day, a seemingly creepy old man, who we come to understand as her guide, trainer, overseer, who's known as her watcher of sorts, comes to her to explain she is the chosen one. She's the only person who can stop the vampires from taking over her town, and presumably the world. What follows is Buffy discovering her true calling, realizing she's been this one-of-a-kind woman her entire life, then learning how to battle and beat up some vampires until the ultimate vamp of them all, the Master, is taken out. Of course, there's a fair amount of teenage rebellion and Heather's Whedon-style dialogue sprinkled all throughout this script. As a fan of horror movies, Whedon has always said that Buffy was born out of seeing blonde girl after blonde girl slain in horror movies. So Buffy is intended to be, that blonde girl who walks down a dark alley and gets to fight back. Kristy Swanson, who plays Buffy, nails this title role. She was the coolest, the girl you wanted to be or the girl you wanted to be with. You see the strength beneath her vapid veneer. The latter disappears fairly soon into the film, too. Buffy's been coasting by, that is, until she starts paying attention to the world around her. On top of a pretty decent gymnast-inspired fight scenes, it kind of looks like Swanson does a lot of them. I'm not really sure, but it looks like it. There's spot-on high school satire, worthwhile character development, a pretty hip soundtrack for the time, a handful of great, energetic montages, which I love, and overall, it's a pretty enjoyable horror comedy. Dear Sweet Departed, Luke Perry plays the damsel in distress role and also half sidekick to Buffy. Rutger Hauer, also R.I.P. buddy, is the head vamp, the Master. And while he does struggle a little bit with a lisp with those fangs in, he doles out a fairly creepy performance. Donald Sutherland fits strangely well in with this cast as Buffy's teacher, her watcher. There's a baby-faced David Arquette who gets vamped early on, and his scene where he's floating outside Luke Perry's window still kind of bothers me. A very, very, pre-Oscar performance by Hilary Swank as Buffy's dim-witted friend. She pops up in this. There's also a blink and you miss it Ricky Lake pop-in, as well as a Ben Affleck spotting. But one of my faves, I've talked about her before, Candy Clark from The Blob, episode 40. She plays Buffy's mom, and she's the complete opposite of if you're a fan of the show, she's the opposite of Buffy's mom in the show, but Candy Clark nails this role as always. And of course, as this is a Pee-wee Herman episode, no one can forget Paul Reubens' part in this movie. He's so stellar as the Master's lead minion vampire. And why it's particularly awesome was, like we said before, Buffy was the first movie he did after his arrest in 91. And this was the first role that was directly offered to him. After his career was unfairly torn to shreds, it was Buffy that pulled him from the wreckage. And as if to kind of make light of the entire affair, the production asked if he could keep that appearance of like when he was arrested because they wanted him to look as far away from Pee-wee as possible. Aside from the obvious differences, the movie still plays pretty well as a precursor to the television show. As I've said before, I'm a fan of the show, but this isn't obviously about the television show. However, I think it is super important to talk about some obvious tone differences and problems Whedon had, with the film as opposed to the TV show. Like one, Joss Whedon was strictly on set in a advisory role. He sold the Buffy script to Sandollar, which was Dolly Parton's production company. And, there were good intentions behind it, but he lost some creative control with this script. Of course, the man can't write anything without a twinge of humor. Buffy wouldn't be Buffy without it. But Whedon never intended for the film to be a straight-up horror comedy. It had a much darker tone originally, and the studio just felt like audiences would not get down with that. They felt it just wouldn't play well. They also cut out or altered a lot of Whedon-style jokes because they felt that they were just kind of too abstract. But this is a vibe that is certainly was resurrected for the series. And kind of lastly, I don't know too much about this, but I do know that there were some creative differences between Donald Sutherland and Joss Whedon. Like, Joss Whedon did not appreciate how Donald Sutherland was playing this role, and I guess there were some pretty fierce disagreements. So obviously, when you go into this movie, if you know the series but don't know the movie, know that there are going to be some obvious tone differences between the two. But Buffy was always intended to be a role model, the kind of person that others could look up to. She wasn't perfect, but she's a hero and a normal person at the same time. Although the TV show had, time to go a lot deeper, I think we get a great Cliff Notes version of Buffy in the movie, how being a hero and trying to live a normal life isn't exactly an easy combo. However, the original script was changed. This film made its own rules for vampires, and in a genre that's been done to death, it's pretty impressive, actually. So remember, this is a horror light teen comedy. Don't go into this looking for blood and gore. This theatrically released version of the Buffster was intended to be very light. There are some clunkier moments in the movie, but this is not supposed to be a big ol' action movie. I think if anything is lacking in the film, it's made up for by how much heart and humor comes through on screen. And I mean, just take another look at Paul Reubens' death scene and just try not to laugh, or like find plenty of moments in this movie that totally work.
Yeah, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is such a fun movie. And I love Paul Reubens' character and his death scene.
His death scene's great. When he loses his arm is great. There's just, Paul Reubens is awesome in this movie. And it is really just like totally innocent, fun movie. But there is a little bit of darkness to it. But great teen horror comedy. Yeah,
and it came along at a time where the vampire genre was on like a downslope. So it was sort of in between. It was like during the lull moment of vampire movies.
It was some fresh blood, you might say.
What?
Uh-huh. I would really love to hear about House Guest, which is completely different from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah. Yes, House Guest, though a comedy, so much different than Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's a very simple story, actually one that was kind of done to death by the mid-90s, the sort of fish out of water mix-up story. But its real strength lies on the shoulders of its stars, Sinbad and Phil Hartman. Phil Hartman, dearly departed, great cast member of Saturday Night Live, always doing what he does best, playing the straight man. Sinbad really does shine in this movie. If you were around in the 90s or watched comedies in the 90s, Sinbad was kind of huge in the mid-90s. Started out on television with Different World, started getting small comedic roles, until eventually getting his own show. In about 1995, he was like a top billed actor for, several comedies in the mid-90s. I think House Guest is probably one of the best. He was orphaned when he was younger. Now he always dreamed of being rich and a millionaire, but now he's middle-aged and that never quite happened for him. But he's sort of like a street smart, kind of always looking for that quick rich deal or quick rich gimmick. But he's in it deep with the mob for about 50 grand. So they're chasing him down, and he sees Phil Hartman picking up a friend that he says he overhears saying, oh, he hasn't seen him in 25 years. He doesn't even remember what he looks like because they haven't seen each other and they're kids. So he finds his way, finds the perfect opportunity to hustle his way into this sort of affluent family, straight-laced family. And that's where the real fish out of water story begins. This is very much a movie that you've seen time and time again. This story is very paint by numbers, but Sinbad and Phil Hartman play off each other really great. There's a lot of really like comedic setups, and then also too, I feel like there's a lot of real charming moments. It's the same story you've seen many times where these two characters are totally clashing, and then they eventually change each other's lives for the better and realize things about themselves that they hadn't before, and has like your pitch perfect sort of Hollywood ending. But man, Sinbad really sells this movie. I mean, he's a very energetic and comedic actor, and I think he just plays a really great with Phil Hartman. And this is what I would consider like perfect Sunday afternoon fare if you're chilling out, and especially if it's cold out on a Sunday afternoon, pop on House Guest. Unfortunately, it's not streaming anywhere at the moment, but I think you can still rent it on like Amazon Prime. I end up finding a DVD at like V-Stock, I think for like $8 or something like that used.
And looking back on some of these images, like it's all kind of coming back to me. But the tagline that just popped out to me was, he came, he ate, he stayed. I don't know why that's like funny to me, but there's something really charming about Sinbad, and he just sells anything comedic so easily. Yeah, this is a fun one.
Yeah, I always thought Sinbad sort of had like he has like good comic timing, and he kind of did like the street smart thing that Eddie Murphy did, but like without without any kind of rawness. Like he was like a sort of a clean Eddie Murphy sometimes. Yeah. Very family friendly. So those are our picks of the week: House Guest and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We kept it in the comedy house for this episode. Well, let's keep moving. Here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even show.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shucked?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
So I'd been hanging on to this week off Saturday Night Live related short film until I had a pretty good reason, and Pee-wee's Paul Reubens seemed like the best excuse. So back in episode 22, which was Batman, the Murray moment was about the time Billy spent playing with the Grays Harper Loggers during the summer of '78. Although Billy did actually play with the baseball team, SNL capitalized on Billy and the entire cast's summer off from the show. Things We Did Last Summer was a short film which aired during the third season of SNL in '78. It was an hour long with commercials, replacement for an episode, and unlike Live from Mardi Gras, which was our Murray moment back in episode 21, these vignettes weren't typical SNL skits. There weren't any recurring SNL characters or anything like that. This was an exceptionally dry humor, mockumentary dramatization, or exaggeration of what the cast got up to while on break from the show. And it was directed by Gary Weiss, the guy who directed the subject of our episode 28 Murray moment, another mockumentary short film put out the same year, The Ruddles' All You Need Is Cash. Don't you love how all these Murray moments sometimes intertwine? We've done like almost 50 of them now. Of course they're going to intertwine. Okay, I digress. In Billy's Things We Did Last Summer vignette, after completing his first full season of SNL, he decides to quit comedy and fully commit to baseball. While his integration into the Grays Harbor Loggers is documented, we're shown how he's constantly bombarded with bad jokes at every turn, from teammates to anyone else he comes across. All jokes are usually followed by, "You can use that one for the show." From the onset, Billy finds it nearly impossible to fake any type of laughter. As this segment goes on, he proves to be an amazing baseball player, but in the end, he decides to go back to comedy because, as he says in the bit, "Unlike all of you guys and most of the people in this town, I have another gift, and that is what is at least some semblance of a sense of humor." So it is with this is when he decides to go back to comedy. What are the other setups for the cast members? Well, Gilda Radner's tired of having fans show up to her apartment, so she starts charging people for tours. Garrett Morris gets back into modeling for lawn jockey sculptures. I'm just going to leave that one. Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi are playing Blues Brothers shows. Lorraine Newman goes on vacation to Bali and ends up like in a bad horror movie. And there's a missing Jane Curtin vignette I've never been able to track down. Now, how on earth is this related to Paul Reubens or Pee-wee Herman? If you follow these Murray moments, you know that I love, love, love small Billy roles. Any actor, really. So when a baby-faced Paul Reubens shows up in Lorraine Newman's summer vacation horror story in this mockumentary, I think it deserves some recognition. So Lorraine sees him and thinks it's her old friend, also named Paul. He gives her the cold shoulder. It's clearly Paul Reubens, but as her story is quickly turning into a nightmare, she's clearly having these horrific visions that are starting. Paul turns into a Nazi that just starts laughing at her by the end of the segment. It sounds kind of wacky, but I guess you just have to see the whole episode. As we said earlier in the podcast, Paul Reubens auditioned for the season 6 cast of SNL, and when the show was being completely retooled. And as we said then, I wonder how this would have affected Paul Reubens' career had he been on SNL. He was friends with Lorraine Newman from The Groundlings, and Phil Hartman, who was later in the show. It just really makes you wonder what would have happened, to his career had he gotten on SNL. I digress again. Things We Did Last Summer, some describe as unfunny, but it's a totally different style than what SNL viewers were used to. Personally, I love it. Seek it out if you can, either on DVD, but I know you can also find it out there another way. If Billy and the original SNL cast members aren't enough, let a before he was totally famous Paul Reubens pop in be another, because it's pretty worth it.
Yeah, I was hoping that there was going to be some sort of tie-in with SNL with Paul Reubens.
He did host, but it was not during the time that Bill Murray was on SNL.
Yeah, strange. I feel like they would get along in some ways.
Yeah, I've tried to find more crossover. There is a little bit that's just hard to mine out some stories unless you can call someone directly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could totally see them getting along.
Well, thank you for that Murray moment.
Of course, as always.
Well, do we have any final thoughts on Pee-wee's Big Adventure before we wrap up this episode?
Yeah. What was your final? I know I have one somewhere in my notes here.
I think the only thing I really wanted to make mention of, us being both pet lovers, is that it seems Pee-wee really, in his movies and his show, pets seem to be a pretty important part of his character and his makeup, especially in Big Top Pee-wee. It's all about the animals.
Oh yeah, definitely. And
I kind of like that he incorporates animals into his movies, but not in, they're not in a super cheesy way.
No, that totally says something. But in Big Adventure, in the famous scene where there's the pet store that's on fire and he's taking all the animals out one by one. One of those, is it? Yes, it is. One of those dogs is the poodle is who we've talked about from the Burbs.
Oh.
Darla.
Wow.
Darla the dog makes another appearance in one of our movies.
Crazy.
But just give it a little slow clap real quick.
Yeah.
Just for Darla. Got it. Mad love for that dog. Where it's so funny that Pee-wee keeps passing up the snakes, it's like the last creature that he wants to take out. Paul Reubens was actually not a fan of snakes. So when you see him and he has that disgusted look every time that he's passing them, but he does, reluctantly take all the snakes out. He did that because Tim Burton said, we'll figure out a way. They're not going to be real snakes. It's going to be fine. And then the day came to shoot that scene, and Tim Burton came to his trailer and had this look on his face like, ugh. And Paul Reubens was like, they're real. They got to be real, don't they? And
it's such a, and it's also too, like, just editing wise, I think this movie, it's one of my favorite cuts is where it's the cops. It's Pee-wee's passed out because of the snakes.
Yeah.
And this cop's like, this, he's a hero, and then immediately cuts to the footage on the Warner Brothers lot of him like riding his bike across like one of like their Godzilla sets, and then it cuts to like security, like, and they're watching the like surveillance footage with them.
That is really good. A little fun fact too that I found out. When I guess it's a couple little fun facts regarding the biker scene. One, when Pee-wee has all the bikers' approval and takes off on one of their motorcycles, and he kind of loses control and blasts through the sign that's on alongside of the road. You see off to the left, it looks like Pee-wee's thrown from the motorcycle. I've thought that my entire life, and it's funny,
Like, it looks like his body just sort of flies forward after he goes through the sign,
and it looks kind of bad, like poorly done, and that's what makes it like extra funny. But if you look closer, that is actually just a piece of the sign. It's not Paul Reubens flying off of the motorcycle.
And even though listening to the commentary, both Tim Burton and Paul Reubens confirming it was just a bit of the sign that popped off. I rewound it and watched it like 3 times, and it still looks like a body like flops across the screen far away to me, and it just cracks me up every time.
Yeah, every time.
But what a happy accident that was, huh?
Totally. One other quick little thing. I always wondered, where did Paul Reubens come up with that dance? Like the infamous tequila dance. So he had actually been doing that for quite a few years before that. So by the time that they got around to filming that, he already had that dance down. That was his thing. That's him on his tiptoes and those crazy shoes. All of that is Paul Reubens. But the what is with the one hand pointing to your crotch, the other pointing to your butt? Like, what is that? Well, upon further investigation, that stems from, I'm going to get a little third grade humor here. That stems from a dirty joke that Paul Reubens' dad used to tell, and Paul Reubens couldn't remember the punchline exactly, but it had something to do with putting one finger in your mouth and one finger in your butt and then switching back and forth. But he can't remember the punchline.
Yuck.
So, in the words of Pee-wee Herman, I love that story.
Wrecked him. Damn near killed him.
Oh, anyway, so that's your last little tidbit there from the biker scene. Also, if you don't know Elvira's in that scene.
Peterson,
yes.
Who I believe is like a pretty tight with Pee-wee.
Yeah, they're pretty good friends.
Well, that ends another episode of Don't Push Pause. We hope you've enjoyed our discussions on Pee-wee and Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
I have really loved going back and reviewing Pee-wee. If you guys should all go back, watch this movie, and just dive deep into Pee-wee Herman. It's pretty fun.
And I know, like, I texted you, and I was like, "Oh, I'm Pee-wee'd out," and you were like, "Geez, don't bring me down. We're getting ready to record the podcast." And
Dude,
I was like, I don't mean I'm like
up
I was
right
like,
now.
you're like, no, man, I can't get enough of Pee-wee. And then so I was like, no, I'm ready to talk about it. I don't know that I can watch any. I watched a lot of Pee-wee Herman for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And
I can get kind of dark sometimes in my normal life.
Yeah.
So his ridiculous, naive positivity was like just kind of really refreshing.
Yeah.
I loved it.
And some of it I felt bad because Mary's not into. Mary, my wife, is not into Pee-wee, and so
oh really?
There was a lot of hours of just like, oh man, like you're like watching it again, you know. I was like, no, it's a different thing, but yeah, it was a lot of Pee-wee.
Pretty funny.
Thank you for bearing with Mary.
Yes.
On those many hours of Pee-wee, but yeah, it's good. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, such a great movie.
Never gets old.
Classic. Well, next episode.
Whew. Wow.
Is our 50th episode, which, you know, there's a ton of podcasts and some people are in like episode 600 or whatever.
Yeah.
But when we started this, the idea of like getting to episode 50 just seemed like crazy, you know.
I still remember all the episodes.
I just figured we end up hating each other and get into a big fight, like somewhere around, you know, the double digits, and then this whole thing would end.
We cut all those episodes out. Man, we're here, and I love it.
Yeah.
50th episode. So what did we decide on?
You know, it was tough because we wanted to cook up something that was like kind of a fun big movie, but also something maybe that isn't totally something that everybody's talked about. And you know, we started talking about, well, we went and saw a movie together, and then we came out, and I don't know why we started talking about James Cameron, and then we're like, oh, we haven't done a James Cameron movie for the podcast, and then we're like, oh, it's the 50th episode, and
maybe we should do a big director.
Yeah,
or
and
something.
then we didn't want to do. That's how we talk all the time
Yeah.
when we're off mic to each other, and we landed on James Cameron The Abyss because it's a movie that we both really enjoyed, but it's one that's not, you know, usually the top movie that people talk about when you're talking about James Cameron. And we thought it would be a fun movie to tackle because it's one that we both hadn't seen in a little while, and it is a very involved movie. There's a lot to discuss with that one. So
yes.
Next episode, our 50th episode, we'll be talking about James Cameron The Abyss.
I kind of can't wait. I used to know that movie forwards and backwards as a younger human, but I certainly do love it.
Yeah. Well, that'll be a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you love your underwater movies.
I love my underwater
I do
movies.
too.
Yeah.
I have a feeling our picks of the week are going to be like all underwater adventure.
Oh, man. I hope so.
Yeah.
There's
You know it's going to be.
There's something. I love underwater things.
I know us.
I mean, it's the world you don't know what's out there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what the Abyss is about.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. We're not going to get anything. Simmer down.
Take it easy.
Simmer down.
Just take it easy. Okay. Well, if you haven't already, please follow us on our social medias. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Don't Push Pause Podcast. If you want to check out old episodes, check out our merch, check out information, you can find us at don'tpushpausepodcast.com. And if you want to reach us directly, you can always contact us via email at don'tpushpausepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reaper.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, guys.